Welcome to The Elephant in the Org, presented by the Fearless People Experience. Do you know those things in the workplace that make work suck, but remain unchanged? Well, those are the elephants we're here to talk about. We believe that these topics can and should be addressed with common sense, courage, and compassion. We may not have all the answers, and we're definitely not always going to be right. But we're here to build a better people experience. You gotta start somewhere. Let's go.
Welcome back to the Elephant in the Org, everyone. I'm Danny Glutch. I'm here with my co-hosts, Kasha Dora.
Hello.
And Marian Anderson.
Hello.
And we have a guest, Paula Brockwell. Welcome to the podcast, Paula.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And since you're on, today's Elephant in the Org is culture change. Tell us a little bit about what you do with culture change and what your background is.
So background is I'm an occupational psychologist who spent the last 20 years working to support organisations with culture change. But I probably spent the first 15 years of my career holding back the kind of disappointment and rage at how much we accept how little this stuff works, really, and that I had to be the face of hope and energy for clients, knowing that it was only going to work about a third of the time. And I guess that sets the frame for what I do now. When I started my own business about 6 years ago, I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do it in a way that really works. And then instead of blaming businesses for change not working, I'm going to be curious about what stopped it working and build an approach that takes that into account. So that's what I do now. I play with businesses and support them to really activate their change and build their best cultures, but do it in a way that looks to overcome the old problems and things and really activates people to build their own stuff, really, and make the best environments that they need every day.
I love how you said play with different companies, that, you know, you're going in and it's like a sandbox and you're learning. Like 30%, you said 30% is the normal, like, actual success rate?
Yeah, well, I'm exaggerating there. I think it's about 34. So, you know, it's not that big an exaggeration, but most of the research comes out at anywhere between 30 to 40% success rate of any major culture change that happens within organizations.
So I think that underpins why today's episode is called Culture Change or Any Change Management. Why does it usually go tits up?
Yeah, so why is it 2 out of every 3 goes tits up? What did you learn?
Well, so for me, I think the thing that shocked me most when I first started to explore this is how we think about culture change as being really separate from a lot of the insights that we've got in other mass behaviour change. So if you look at things like marketing, efficacy, if you look at public health or mass behaviour change from a security, health, governance point of view, it is much more effective at influencing individuals' attitudes and behaviours than whenever you look at in organisations. And honestly, I just don't think we've learnt the lessons. We built values, mission and purpose in the 1980s, and that made the big consultants a lot of money, and we've kind of carried on doing it that way, and we haven't really found another way. So there just hasn't been innovation in this area for a long time. And, you know, there is pockets of it. There's the revolution is afoot, but there is a lot for us to do to kind of educate and support HR leaders to look for something different, I think, and do something different for their businesses.
I think if someone gave us $1 or £1 for every time that an organisation brought in some overpriced consultant to whip up a set of generic values and mission statements and gives everybody a free pen and a diary planner with it printed all over it, and then it gets stuffed in the drawer, never to be seen again until 10 years later when someone realises, oh, we should actually have some values, right? We should actually have something that helps our culture. So I still can't really wrap my head around why we're still doing this 20 years later and we've still not really solved this problem.
The difference between, like, we're going to hire the consultant and make change happen. It's all bright and flowery and like, ooh, but the doing part, the doing that they do when the consultant is gone is 2 separate things. And so everyone gets all hyped, everyone gets super excited, but the actual change part doesn't, like, how you live it out post consultancy. Like, it's like that, what is it, 28 days to build a habit or something like that? I can't even imagine what that's like when you put it under the lens of an organization with lots of different people's backgrounds. on how they would approach change.
I just think you hit the nail on the head there, because for me, a lot of what consultancy does, and a lot of what we do in culture change, is this instinct of what can we do, but actually what culture is about is how can we be, and that's a different thing, isn't it? You know, that's about thinking and heart and the opportunity to let things settle and understand them and be able to confront and overcome our fears, and in shifting how we are, then what we're able to do is do things differently. But what often either businesses aided by consultancy or not is, right, we want to, it's not even we want to get to this great thing. Often they don't even know what great looks like. They just know we don't want people to do these annoying things anymore. So what are we going to do to stop them doing those things, rather than how do we help them be so that different behaviour comes out? And by the way, what does even good behaviour look like? So there's a real shift, I think, that is happening. You know, we're definitely fueling through our business to really try and make it about being, and that piece around the environments that we create and what that pulls out of people.
Yeah, that's such an interesting call out, the difference between being and doing. And you were talking earlier about like big sort of doing changes of, you know, governance. I remember post 9/11, everyone had to learn these new procedures of how to travel on airplanes. I remember we flew just a couple weeks after it happened to go look at colleges. And I remember that learning, like everyone had the right attitude of let's be patient, let's figure out, let's just do what we're asked. And whatever they wanted to do was going to get done, right? The change was going to happen because the attitude was there. And I feel like there's just a different, like you can't cultivate those attitudes of readiness to listen, and you're going to have sort of that adoption sort of spectrum. There aren't going to be just a whole bunch of people ready and waiting to adopt what you say. There's going to be a lot more hesitation, and like, I've been doing this job for 15 years. Now you're going to tell me I need to use this computer? Like, there's a lot of that stuff, right? And I really think that line between being and doing it's almost all of a sudden a different skill set. You're doing a different thing.
The resistance to change is real.
Yeah. Well, and I think the big differentiator you're talking about there in terms of that adoption of new behaviours post 9/11 is the why, isn't it? You know, there is an absolutely clear, demonstrable reason for why those behaviours needed to be different. And I think a big part of organisational change that we miss out on is that why on an individual level. So the reason that people think corporate values are great is they think they are the why, but our personal values will always trump the corporate values. And unless we show people why on a personal level, it's never going to work. And honestly, that's why we called our business the Employee Experience Project. It's not because we want to go and map out life cycles, as seems to happen a lot in the EX world. It's because we want to express culture in terms of what does this mean in terms of how I feel on a day-to-day basis and the role that my work has in the rest of my life. Because if you make that make sense to people, and you make the new behaviour and the new approach make sense to them in that context, then they want to do it because it's about them, and it's about something that pays off for them as well as the business. So that deal is massive, and that why is massive in my world.
Just an observation there, something you said about, you know, your personal values being, you know, more pronounced, more amplified than the organisational values. And that's true. I mean, for me, certainly the older that I've got, my values have got louder and louder and louder, to the point now where, you know, if I speak to anyone about a contract or, you know, about a role, one of the first things I'll always say is, I only want to work with nice people. I don't want to work with assholes, right? Because I'm at that stage of my career where I've done that and I'm past it. And for me, you know, to feel psychologically safe and do my best work, I want to work with good people, right? And I think when you also look at that generationally as well, we know that our millennials and our Gen Zs are not willing to take the same kind of crap in the workplace that we took as Gen Xers, right? And obviously boomers before us. So I think that, you know, there's such a shift in how we want to think, feel, be in our day-to-day at work. And, you know, we can't just keep ignoring that, and we can't just keep chucking in half a dozen fake values and hope that, you know, solves the problem.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a question. So with this 1/3, give or take, works, 2/3 doesn't, when you go into an organisation, can you tell straight away usually which ones are probably going to go well and which ones are going to go tits up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can totally tell. I think the piece around businesses that can look at their colleagues with empathy and understand their position, and understand that sense of readiness to target change initiatives. If a business is ready to do that or not. I think there's also a thing about that clarity of why. Are we in a place of blame and fix, or are we in a place of build? I think is massively important as well. And I think the other piece for me as well is about who do we think is going to make this change happen. So if a business is in a place that it's willing to explore how you do this through a tribe, how you mainstream this out into the business and empower people to make those changes happen, then that's really going to make the difference. Honestly, though, I think those are the factors that really impact whether change is going to succeed or not, but you can foster those. So sometimes actually all you need is a jumping off point. So somebody to really care enough to want to make those things happen, or to listen and learn and take your guidance around creating those factors. So sometimes I might go in and think, oh, this one's stuck. I need to understand a little bit more. And then it surprises me, the conversations that I have. I see that opportunity for movement. And in other places, people look ready, and then you start to have some of those deeper conversations, and you realize actually that they just know the words, but they don't necessarily know how to put them, or they don't want to put those words into action. So there's a big thing for me in my relationships with clients, similar to yourself. I've got a kind of no knobhead rule on this. You've got to make sure that you're connecting with people who have an authentic desire to make environments where people thrive, and that their business will prosper through that. And with that desire comes success. Without that, then as a practitioner, I risk doing more harm than I do good, and I'm just not interested in that.
Yeah, I hear empathy, authenticity, like those are like really deep, awesome things to have in leaders. I'm just wondering, like, do those need to be in the team leaders? Is this just your people team? Is it your CEO? Who are you looking at in the organization to really have that empathy, that authenticity that's going to unlock this working?
To start with, I think it's through the HR team, because they're key activators. They will often be the people who orchestrate the change. But also, I think it's massively important within the CEO, because accountability is important. For me, change needs three things, really. It needs a vision or a standard of where we're trying to get to, so that we know what good looks like. We need to build the capability, the readiness and the capability to drive through. So people actually being a place where they can display those new behaviours. But then there also needs to be accountability. So if the CEO isn't in, then the whole accountability structure drops away. So you need this to be something that's important to them. It doesn't have to be important to them because they want the business to be sunshine and rainbows. If it's because they want to prove themselves before they retire in 5 years, I don't really care. As long as they want to do it in a tone that allows that to happen appropriately, they just need a linch pin that makes them care. Makes them care about it. Really,
I love that too, because it really is one of those things, right? Like, whether we're talking about culture change, the action of change management, whatever it looks like, I think when people view it as really only lying on the shoulders of one person or one department, you're guaranteed to not have the pass-through rate that you're looking for. And so even like being able to kind of say, like, is it top down? Yes. Is it also like, is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Is it lateral? Is it circular? Is it all of these things? And the answer is yes, right? Like, it goes anywhere, any direction it needs to, because you need the buy-in from everyone. You need to have people who are individual contributors be just as empathetic as people who have 15 reports to them and then 7 reports under them. And you know what I mean? Like the lines just keep moving. I think it's so important for that, because I think you said it perfectly, Paula. Like, if the CEO isn't in, is it still going to live?
Yeah, it's not, is it? It's not going to, because other things will get prioritized. That's the truth of it. But similarly, if the if the CEO isn't into letting it live, that's the other thing. They've got to drive accountability, but they've also got to let this fly. So, I talk about the idea of lighting little fires. I see my job as a consultant as starting to light those little fires around the organization that are little points of revolution from the existing system, but then it needs something within the system that's giving that the oxygen and the fuel that it needs so that those can connect into a big fire. So as a consultant, you can do so much. You can activate and build the momentum, but you can't connect those fires. That's got to come from building that capability and will within. And that for me is where the game changer in what I do now versus what I used to do was it was an ego thing about we will come in and change and impact for you. And now my job is about coach, enabler. Yes, get people excited and get things started, but always thinking about that point of extraction. At what point do you not need me anymore because you've got this and you're going to make this happen yourself? Because that's when it becomes cultural. If it relies on me, it's not cultural, is it? It's just everybody's in the Church of Paula, which is a lovely place to be and everything, but it's not going to make a difference long term.
I'm going to take points of revolution.
Sounds like a lovely place.
As she was talking, all I could think about was the Prodigy fire starter, and I was like,
oh yeah. The points of revolution. I was like, my 16-year-old punk self is so happy right
now. So I've got a question. So obviously, what you just said there about, this is not the gospel according to Paula. However, it is coming in and being that agent for change and supporting people on that journey, which is, as we've all learned, I think through trial and error, is the right way to go, right? If you try to drag the ship along by yourself, by your teeth, you're going to be gumsy pretty damn quickly.
Right.
So you mentioned earlier, obviously, the kind of initial activators tend to be people teams, which is true. But in my experience, unless you've got a really bought-in C-suite, it is often like pushing water uphill, trying to get people to understand it, first of all, to buy into it, to not think of it as being more HR fluff, which they're not interested in. And even though we need to do this, and here's all the fundamental academic empirical reasons why, it can be very hard to reach executives sometimes. And I think a lot of that is psychological, because I think that our department, our role comes with a lot of baggage. There's been a lot of, bad experiences that people have had with, random person in HR over the years. And that's coloured how they see us and our effectiveness. So how do you, when you come into that situation where you can definitely feel that resistance and that, there really is that pushing water uphill moment, how do you get in there and really support that HR team to make this change?
Well, really, the first step is about connecting with the CEO and changing the narrative around culture from that's something that those people over there do to make people a bit happy so that they don't moan at us too much, into a place of let's really see culture as an enabler of our business strategy and our goals. So one of the first conversations I will often have is directly with the CEO saying, what do you want this business to be? What will you be proud of in a few years' time? What are you trying to create? Talk to me about what it is that you're trying to drive from your business strategy point of view, and what behaviours have you got, or what is causing drag for you from a behavioural point of view, and really look to start to reframe culture as that rocket fuel for the business strategy in terms of showing them that will unlock the culture that will unlock the behaviour that they need moving forward. So it's almost moving the language away from culture to ideal behaviours and really aligning it to the business goals and landscape. And I do kind of do that myself because, as you say, I think often you come in and you see these muddy relationships between HR and C-suite, and whether that's because of history, legacy, whether that's because HR people often I see are actually so desperate to get things moving that they've accidentally positioned themselves into this role of one man band where they become the self-fulfilling prophecy as owners of culture because they are stepping up and challenging and they're bridging the gap where other people aren't doing it, and over the time it's just become their job. It's helping to unpick that and support often not just the HR director but also looking at things like the internal comms lead, etc., if there is one, helping them build that conversation and that contract with the CEO that they are responsible for the culture together, and that the HRD and the HR team can be advisors, trusted enablers, but not the owners, and support them in transferring that ownership back. But the only way you do that is talking the language of business, and that's one of the bits of feedback I get a lot. And had it a couple of weeks ago, I had a call with a new client, and one of them just went, "You talk like them. You need to go in front of our leadership team." And I think it's, that language of performance, productivity, shifting out of the softer language that we often use in HR into the business language helps to move it into that sphere sometimes.
Just a question connected to that, because that's something that I do. I'm constantly shape-shifting to mirror the exec that I'm in front of. And, the best relationship of all, I think, if you can nail it, is the relationship between the CFO and the CPO or HRD, whatever, because that is critical. Have you found a way to articulate ROI in any form through any of the change management efforts that you've been part of? Because that, I think, is the holy grail, right? If you can demonstrate some form of ROI, you're almost home free. So anything around that?
Yeah, and I think absolutely we do pre and post program metrics on lots of things through the standard people stuff on engagement, retention, speed to recruitment, advocacy. All the stuff, sickness levels, do all that stuff, but also look at business performance. So do that across the course of the project to show the impact, to create the foundations of buy-in to move forward. But honestly, in the early stages, typically what I find is that there's a load of data that we're not leveraging as well as we could do. So if we've got that data in our business, if we're having what we can literally do is just take sections from high performing and low performing teams and have a look at the difference in things like ENPS, engagement scores, etc. Look at and then map that to things like customer satisfaction or financial outcomes, etc. So doing that bit of work where you're linking within your own business, all you're doing is echoing the research, because you will do that. If employee experience, engagement and motivation and connection is high, performance is high, showing that within your own business and pulling up the poster boy and girl teams that are positive or negative examples in that private space, obviously, but that helps you to demonstrate it. And it also creates potentially for you those in larger organizations. What we'll often do is create kind of Trojan horse teams. So those that perhaps are really in crisis and struggling, will go in and focus on those and push those forward to show in a much more controlled way that the change is possible. And that all just builds your story and your data for kind of engaging the broader team.
I really like how you kind of helped to simplify it for a lot of people who were listening a little bit. And it's not simple in any way, but being able to kind of talk about people's behaviors, their psychology, their the ethos that they have is either as a human or that they're bringing in, and then combining that with their performance, right? You're taking the human factor and then you're also taking their performance. And that's how we can kind of start to get that look of an ROI in a very nebulous area. Because to Marian's point, right, whether you're in a people team, organizational development, talent development, talent management, L&D, the ROI question's so difficult because at the end of the day, it's all support roles. So you're not revenue generating, air quote, to begin with, right? But being able to say, if your morale is low and the way that people even interact with each other, right, their behaviorisms, if that's not cohesive to productivity, and we all very much believe that happy people equal productivity, which equals profit, right? There's a clear line of thought there. And I really love how you articulated that, Paula. That was awesome.
But the truth is, I'm a Northern Irish prison officer's daughter. So if you can imagine how practical and tangible my upbringing was, when I told my dad I was going to be a psychologist, he was like, "Are you one of those ones who just changes the colour of the stones to make us happy?" So growing up in a Northern Irish home, you'll know what I mean on this, Marian. You have to be so just down the line, practical about things. And I think that really helps me in my practice, because I'm realistic that businesses run on productivity, even really moral businesses that want their people to be effective. They run, there's got to be commercial or, some sort of output performance for that business to survive. And it's not, often our instinct is to try and influence on the should do's. It's not a dirty word, and it's not a dirty thing to do to influence on the business bottom line. So let's use that, because we know that works in those rooms, really. So use the existing data that you've got and match that up. You've probably got it. It's just that it's harder to, if you don't use what you've already got, it's harder to tell the story, really.
Yeah. I love that you gave kind of two different strategies of how to like spark this change. You had the lighting lots of little fires until you can pull away and it's going to self, propel itself. Or also this Trojan horse idea. And I wanted to like the next step that you sort of mentioned is this like accountability part. And a lot of how I understand culture is like the attitudes and the behaviors that are allowed, encouraged, and the ones that aren't allowed and the ones that are discouraged. How do you get people to start like that sort of self-policing, that sort of like positive peer pressure to like, no, we don't do that anymore. Like they're gonna do the Danny squint when someone does something that they know like that's not okay anymore. I famously do a squint when someone does something that I disapprove of.
I wait for it.
You haven't caused it yet. It's very good.
We have memes of it and everything else.
We do. We use stickers of it and everything.
That's my goal for the end of the session. See if I can elicit one from you, Danny. We'll see how we go.
Yeah, but how is it that you get that to start living in the teams? Is that something that's a little bit what those little fires are about? Is that something that you do in that sort of Trojan horse group?
It's the favourite question that anyone's asked me all year, so thank you for asking me it. And for me, it's the reason that it's the reason that I find values so offensive. So sorry, I'm going to take you on a journey on this, so forgive me. But so the whole reason that we orientated how we talked about culture around this idea of employee experience is moving the conversation to impact from direct behaviours or intent. Because when you're talking about values, and say one of your values is creative, you end up in a world potentially where you're saying to me in my performance review, Paula, you're not very creative because you are king of mega creative, and me in my straight lines and always doing things the way that I always have with my Northern Irish dad is like, actually, you know what? Last week I had a slice of Terry's chocolate orange for my pudding rather than a piece of other chocolate, and that's really creative for me. That's really different. So I disagree with you. That's my example of where I'm creative. And you end up in these perceptual conversations of my intent was to be that thing, but it doesn't add up to your standard. But I don't understand your standard because we come from different places. Mm-hmm. If you focus on the experience that you create for other people and impact, what you're immediately doing is shifting people's lens from what's my internal story and what's my intent to what is my impact on other people. So let's use leadership accountability as an example. One of the things that we commonly do in the change programs that we deliver is once we've built that initial playbook for the business and we've got the C-suite to sign up to it, we really quickly design a 360 tool which is aligned to those ideal impacts. So those how do we make it feel for people around your statement? We create a 360 tool and basically we get that sent out for the execs monthly and we do accountability coaching with them that's focusing directly on not how you intended to be or what you believe you're trying to do with your team, but what their experience is, how people see you and the impact that you're having and how you're making them feel. And that for me is the shift in mentality, is me recognizing that what I intend to do might not always come across that way to others, and I need to adapt my behavior based on how other people are responding to that and how they feel about it if I want their behavior to change. So that is part of it, is this bit around create a sense of recognizing your impact on others, create visibility around that, create common conversations about it, and make it okay for us to be able to influence how other people feel. And if they put a filter on it and feel a certain way, we might not be responsible for all of that, but we can look at the part of that feeling that we are responsible for and look to influence that. So we're just trying to drive that sense of empathy and understanding of other people's perspective, which I think then drives that sense of action and consideration of each other.
Wow, that's amazing. It reminded me of, it was another psychologist back in San Francisco who gave me this sort of like mental image of how you impact your community. And it's like, think of you're a house on a street, and the way your house looks and acts affects the community.
Yeah.
But it's not your job to take care of the house across the street. You take care of your side of the street. That's across the street, right? So there's that. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence, right? Like really high EQ to do that. And is that something that you find can be one of those, like, you know what, it's gonna go tits up because I can tell already that the leadership just isn't gonna have the EQ for this? Because a lot of the things you're talking about is really high EQ, like as a baseline.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely, it can do. And I think that's why we use the coaching space, because it's that safe one-to-one space to explore it, to think about it, to give people a chance to experiment with some behaviors and come back into that coaching space to talk about what did and didn't work. So really what you're doing is that EQ accelerator with people in a supportive space. I think it does take high degrees of EQ to really understand the fine detail of some of that. But truthfully, it's, I suppose I use the example of if I get onto a bus in a bad mood, if I'm thinking about the fact I'm grumpy, I'm going to be an asshole to the bus driver. But if I'm thinking about, for a second, my impact on the bus driver, I might not be thinking about his day and how it will make him feel. But if I think about my own personal values about how I want that person to feel after their interaction with me, I'm likely to mask that grumpiness a little bit and just say thank you, or put a smile on my face. So sometimes it's not necessarily initially about fostering that full capability. It's all right to take people on a journey, just starting with the general awareness and a general commitment to want to do something that is a little bit more positive and more likely to impact other people around you positively. That's a great first step. And then those environments get quite people get sucked in. Suddenly it feels that I've done something and it just feels a bit nicer and I get something back. And there's a contagion that happens that allows some of that development to happen organically, because we all like to be treated nicely and to feel like other people like the way we treat them. And it's just about creating the initial flip, I think. And then a lot of that comes itself because people just like it. It's, a lovely place to be.
Do you feel like that's a good sort of like easy first step into that sort of like authentic behavior of this way, as opposed to the, hey, put a smile on your face no matter what, be nice to this person no matter what, like I'm grumpy but I'm going to try to like make this bus driver's day? And as a former bus driver, I really appreciate you people, not going to lie. But is that a good first step to, like, because if it's not authentic, like people, they're not going to buy in, right? I feel like that's a real stonewall to culture.
They can feel it, right?
Yeah.
They can feel it. They can see it, whether or not you think it.
Yeah. But, the bus driver example, whether I'm grumpy or not, I still appreciate that person driving me to where I need to be and doing what they're doing. So I can still say thank you. So even if I'm not like, hey, how are you? I hope you have the best day that you've ever had in your life, because actually I'm just a bit grumpy on things. I think there can be an authenticity, there can be a give in terms of considering your impact on the other people without being inauthentic about your experience. Because the last thing you want to do is be pushing down negative emotions on things. But I think it's a bit about, what am I actually mad at? I'm not mad at that bus driver. I'm probably mad that, my kid was hanging off my head, or my husband hasn't done the dishes or whatever. So direct the emotion where it should it be there? Who knows? But, direct it where it's appropriate rather than into unnecessary places. So like, one of the things that we do that might help to illustrate this is often as we're starting the change and driving it through, we really drive the comms and this narrative around creating an environment where people thrive to allow the business to be successful, and really talk to people about this idea of what can you do to help yourself and other people to thrive? What are the small choices that you can make? And we ask people to make commitments around that, just one initial commitment for themselves. What's the one thing that I'm going to do more regularly to allow myself to have more positive experiences at work? And what's the one thing that I'm going to do more regularly for others, the people around me in my immediate sphere, that allows them to have a more positive experience at work? So we're not saying the rule is you've got to smile at everybody to try and make their day. We're saying stand in your space and how you feel, and what's the first step towards being more reciprocal in creating that positive environment. So it's got to be about, as you say, authenticity and small steps that are meeting people where they are and then taking them on the journey.
I really loved that, just that small little recognition of like, yeah, I am really grateful that this bus is here to take me. I'm grateful for this person who's going to drive me safely. Boom. You can't get more authentic than that, right?
Yeah. I kind of wanted to change gears a little bit, because obviously we've talked on our podcast before about my research for my PhD, which is related to psychological safety and how companies approach remote hybrid working or any form of flexible working, really. So that's definitely been a very prominent change management piece, cultural change management piece over the last few years. And as we know from, seeing in the press, some companies have done it well, most of them haven't. And the impact is real, right? People are sitting, quietly quitting, or whatever we're calling that this week, waiting for the market to change and to get up and go, and they're less productive because, quite frankly, they're pissed off. From your perspective, what have you been seeing kind of out there in that specific area? And, are there any good stories out there of how companies are approaching this type of change and culture change?
Yeah. Are there good stories? Honestly, I think we're still in a period of flux, if I'm completely honest. I think there's a lot of businesses so the businesses that did do it well before or learned how to do it well in the pandemic, I think we can see that they're flying. And I think the good story is that I think for people of our generation, and also people leading businesses of our generation, we've had a swift spiritual kick to the head about how work fits into the rest of the life through the pandemic. And I think that's helped us to be different leaders and different mentors and different business owners, which is a really great thing. So I think change is afoot in some areas, which is amazing. Do I think that the overall machine has changed significantly? I'm not sure I do. And I think you can see the war in the press, where a lot of those prevalent and previous pre-pandemic beliefs, and those who really own the system are trying to pull it back to where it used to be, because that feels safe, and that feels safe to them. And so I think there's a lot of places where it's not being done effectively, because they're trying to find this world of flexibility, but it's not from a point of authentically trying to create a flexibility, to Danny's point around how important that is. It's about just giving them a bit of what they want, so they'll just come back and do what we need them to do. And I think until we're really building a truly authentic new deal with employees that's saying, well, this is what the business needs from you, now what do you need from the business to be able to show up to do that? That's where the revolution will come. But I don't think that's really happening in the vast majority of places. There's been some of that happening. Those businesses are heading into the new world nicely, but there's loads who are still going, now let's go back to the old rules because that felt nicer for me.
Yeah. One of the emotions that I'm really kind of tapping into and getting a sense of, and it makes me really sad, is a widespread sense of shame. People feel shamed by saying that they want to be working at home. They feel shamed by saying, I like having the extra 2 hours back a day where I'm not commuting, so I can study or go to the gym or eat a Terry's chocolate orange, whatever that looks like for you, right? And that sense of shame is one of the most, unspoken about things in an office environment, a work environment, but one of the most dangerous, cancerous type emotions that we can have as human beings. I am genuinely concerned about, this becoming like an epidemic of shame because of this kind of overarching thing of, we're not really comfortable with flexible working to this extent anymore, so let's get everyone back in the office. And that's completely a one-way road to shattering any advances that you've made in your organizational culture. This keeps me awake at night, this stuff.
I agree. And for me, shame is one of the most damaging emotions in culture change. So I talk a lot about the idea of taking a build versus a fixed mentality. You know, often when I first start working with businesses, the motivation is to stop people doing the annoying things that they do. It's not about creating an ideal culture that will enable other things. And I think it's really important, if you're trying to encourage people to move into something new, that you talk to them about improvement and build and an ideal future that you're moving towards, rather than talking to them about all the rubbish things that they need to stop doing. You know, it's and again, there's lessons in so many places. You think about what works in things like the health and well-being space. You don't say to people, stop being a greedy whatever and a lazy this and that. You say to them, where do you want to get to? What's your goal? You know, it's all future focused. And I think it's really interesting how we've got this penalty parent dynamic happening in a big chunk of the business world. That's you don't know what daddy or mummy wants you to do, but you're still not doing it. So just do differently, and then wondering why people are just like, well, I'll work exactly to my wage and no further. You know, it's crazy that people are perturbed or outraged that that's what's happening when they treat people the way they do. Really,
I was just going to say, you know, it's not, you know, there's definitely obviously a direct correlation between that and, you know, what we see across the board with engagement scores, right? Employees' engagement scores are in the toilet, right? They're super low. And it baffles me as to why companies are not seeing that direct correlation. You know, free up the reins, treat your humans as humans and as adults. And guess what? They're going to be happier, you know?
And it's an interesting thing because, you know, Paula, you were kind of mentioning how if we treat people like that downward parent of like, you're doing everything wrong, the workspace has changed, right? When you think about like just the generations that are in the workspace right now, and emerging generations and generations that are starting to leave the workplace, because now you have a lot of people in the workplace where if they encounter something like that downward parent approach, they're going to find a way around it on TikTok. They're going to open up their phone and they're going to say like, you know, I've got a millennial manager. My millennial manager is this, but I have a manager who's like this. You know, like there's an entire space on the social media landscape now that's giving people advice on, like Marian mentioned earlier, maybe like the quiet quitting approach, or how to be resistant in the workplace, or like how do you skate by, how do you like say the right thing for that raise and stuff like that. And so when you have these leaders who are like, no, we want to turn the time back, right? We want to go back to what makes me comfortable, not what helps my workforce. I feel like, I think you are right in what you said earlier, right? Where like, there are some tipping points that I think in the workforce will come to a head at some point, because the people who are working have seen now both sides of the coin. They've seen what it's like to be in the office, and they've seen what it's like to be from home. And because of things like social media, they've also seen what psychological safety might actually look like and the kind of ideal work environment they want to be in. So, and I think giving them that active voice, right? Where, like you mentioned on like, what is it that would help you improve? Like, where would you like to improve, right? Giving someone the voice to be their own advocate, sorry. I think is such a, honestly, an empowering tool that does generate change. Because if you're empowered, you want to do. If you're pushed down, it makes it a very different work experience.
Yeah, well, and I also think there's a real tipping point about the power of talent. You know, with the gig, you know, we're all kind of an indication of the power of the gig economy, aren't we? You know, people, not only are they finding ways to navigate employed roles, but you can find countless examples of people going out and doing whatever they want in whatever profession they want, independently, you know. So I think there's a big thing for big businesses not to just think, well, you know, you have to come here because we've got the graduate schemes and all the things that they were thinking in 1982, because they're just going to wither on the vine. And if I'm honest, a bit of me is conflicted watching the big machine of the norm and the big corporations trying to pull people people back and seeing some of that working. And then there's seeing this uprise of the next generation and what's happening with the gig economy. And I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. You know, what's going to win on this? And what I'm hoping is that those big, inflexible, inhumane things are just going to start to wither and shrink and die on the vine, and something else magical will pop up. But yeah, that's where you start to see my hope for the future coming. But talent will decide, and I don't think talent is tied. Less than ever before, or more than ever before, talent have more choices than they've ever had, and more confidence around backing themselves, which is an exciting time to be alive, as one of my friends says about everything every day. So yeah.
Is that an official prediction for 2024?
I think it'll be more like 2032 before that happens, but you know, it's coming. I think some of the grapes are starting to die now, but you know, it's going to take a while for them to really die out. It'd be interesting to see.
As we're starting the year, and I'm realizing that that was the best question I've heard all year. That's only 10 days. So that compliment, not as good as it seemed at the moment.
Squint at me. Go on, I need one.
What are some of your thoughts on trends, or, you know, maybe culture changes that you see companies wanting to point towards? Any ideas or predictions for this coming year?
Yeah, well, for me, I think to the point that Marion was reflecting on earlier, I think there's a real thing here that we need to sort this tension around hybrid working out. It's got to settle at some point. And so organizations either need to make the decision, the ones that are going to pull people back and deal with the consequences of that, or there needs to be some sort of solution around redealing. And I think that my hope is that there's going to be more sense of looking at that sense of redealing, and certainly the conversations I'm having with organizations and the clients, that the kind of new clients that I'm working with at the moment, are really focused on this sense of how do we reconnect people. So in a more hybrid world, what does that look like? How do we create that new why, that new sense of connection, that new sense of energy, and wanting to provide the effort that the business needs to be able to succeed? So I talked earlier about that idea of the balanced deal. So my hope is that we're going to start seeing some traction around businesses really thinking about, well, what's in it for us and what's in it for them, and how do we really start to balance that? That's certainly the motivation I'm seeing people working with us around, is that sense of let's balance this so that everybody succeeds and prospers, really.
Amen to that.
Yeah. You know, you were talking earlier about behaviors and attitudes that drive and behaviors and attitudes that drag. And I was just wondering, particularly in this, like, what you were just talking about with that really like reconnected culture for this year, are there any behaviors and attitudes that you would really like prescribe for companies to try to make a part of their culture in 2024? Like, what are those behaviors that would really drive, or attitudes?
I think the first one that I most commonly see is for leadership is starting to communicate on the basis of what people need to hear rather than what you want to say. And I think if there's a fundamental shift around really thinking about your audience and what their needs are and where they are, and the fact that you might be on a salary, you know, it was just, well, is it the 4th of January that the CEO day kind of pay happens? I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a big thing in the UK where I think it's like 4 p.m. or maybe it was the 8th of January, I can't remember, but a few days into the year, it's like you have now made a CEO has now made your salary this year, you know. And I think there is a real perceptual and empathy mismatch within C-suite around particularly this thing of flexibility and activating extra time and reducing expense in life. They just cannot understand it because they are getting paid 10 times what their colleagues are, and they have their stay-at-home partner and nannies and can afford their dry cleaning and their cleaner, and they don't have to think about how much their groceries cost them, and they're talking as if they talk to people as if we live in their world and the mass majority of us don't. So you know, take a step back, stand in the shoes of your plumber or receptionist or the like for a minute and talk to them for the human beings they are. And I think we'll start to see some really interesting things happen.
I think the world would be better if we did that. So.
Yeah,
agreed. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Any final orange chocolate? What is it? Terry's?
Terry's
Were we
chocolate
sponsored? I'm so confused. Were we getting money from Terry's orange chocolates today?
No, but I'm definitely going for the candies in my cupboard later on today. That's for sure.
It's a Celtic thing. We can't help ourselves.
But I think on the note of Terry's chocolate orange, that's a good place to wrap up for the day.
It is. Thank you so much. Everybody, be sure to like and subscribe, give 5-star reviews. If you want to reach out to us, you can at elephant@thefearlesspx.com.